Well, hello and welcome to the show. My name is Jim Ferguson, and I've got a fantastic guest. It's the second time he's been here. Ivor Cummins. Ivor, great to see you, mate. How you doing?
Oh, I'm great, Jim, and it's actually sunny in Ireland at the moment, briefly. So all good.
Well, it's not too bad over here in London, but it's nice that you're getting a bit of sunshine over there. I mean, it's nice to get a bit of cheeriness in Ireland at the moment because it's not been so cheery over the last few 24 hours or so, has it? I mean, it's been pretty mad over there, hasn't it?
Oh yeah, well, the last, since really the cerveza sickness, as some people call it, to avoid censorship, Ireland has been nuts. But Ireland was always, I said, long before the cerveza sickness, I used to quote that Ireland is a vassal state of big pharma because it was clear as day, 60% of our exports or GDP were kind of biotech related. We had all the big
Yeah.
pharma here. We had a role in setting pharmaceutical prices on behalf of the European Union. I'm not sure the exact details. And all our politicians dropped the need to big pharma for the jobs which get them elected. So when Ireland kind of went absolutely batshit crazy during Cerveza and they had the hardest lockdown and longest in Europe, it didn't actually shock me too much. Our guys now over the last 30 years, our politicians, they are bought and paid for.
They are, there's a big issue. I mean, I was over in Ireland there a couple of months ago and had a great time. I was down in the south, I was in Limerick, and I was in Dublin, and I was in a lot of places in between. There was guys came up to meet me specifically from Cork because they followed me on the channel, and it was just great, great people. But there's a lot of challenges going on there just now. And what we're
Mm.
witnessing is what's almost like, because I reported on this a little bit earlier today, Donald Trump's come out and he's basically saying, the WHO has become a globalist entity that is trying to capture countries' national sovereignty. He's deeply worried about it. And I know, because we were just speaking before we went to live recording, you've got a good friend called Eddie Hobbs, haven't you? Tell me what's going on with him and what's happening with the WHO.
Yeah, Eddie is doing great work because he's a businessman, investor, and he was a celebrity in Ireland as well. And in way back many years ago, he did Rip Off Republic, a multiple part documentary. And he joined the dots on what was happening with the great financial crash and all the bondholders in Ireland and how the politicians were complicit. And it caused such a storm. It was one of the highest viewed things on national television in history. And then the Irish government actually called him and wanted to have an inquiry of Eddie Hobbs, even though everything he'd said was factual. And in the end, they dropped that. But it shows you how deep the cut went. So Eddie's
Yeah.
super smart. And in the last few months, he's been focusing very much on the World Health Regulations and Pandemic Treaty. And he's picked up something from Tracy O'Mahony, a solicitor in Ireland who was fantastic during Cerveza. And it's the Crotty ruling in the 1980s, where a Supreme Court basically came down and said that the government cannot dispose the Constitution. In other words, in EU treaties, the government cannot simply go ahead without a referendum and make decisions that affect the sovereignty of Ireland, because that's fettered in the Constitution. It's fundamental. So this one with the World Health Regulations, it could be argued, or the pandemic treaty, that it's not actually clearly a sovereignty change like the Crotty ruling dealt with, but it's very much a debate. So either Crotty should be brought up, it's being publicized, and either there's a referendum which will expose all of the outright fraud that's been going on with the World Health Organization,
Yeah.
or it'll at least raise it to a public debate, which can't be ignored. So Eddie's doing super work there.
Well, it's really good to hear. And of course, they are talking about some sort of is it like a summit down in Kerry? Is that right? What's going to happen there then? What's going on?
Yeah, well, actually, this weekend there's a World Health Council. I think Tess Laurie, I think, yeah, I got that correct. There's meetings over the whole weekend. I'm going to speak and run a panel, and Eddie will be there and other people. So that's a
Yeah.
nice little event. But on Monday, there's a globalist kind of summit in Kerry down in Killarney. And basically, they're going to have Tedros beaming in. There's UK and US kind of politicians there. our own kind of treasonous kind of crowd of puppeticians. A bunch of them will be there. I think the finance minister, and it's all very hush hush. So they'd be down there in the tip of Ireland, quietly getting Dr. Tedros to tell them what they need to do to get their instructions. But
I
I
gotta
know there's going to be a form of assembly outside, and it'll all be legal, following all the rules of public assembly. And I believe there'll be a declaration printed and exposed there and recorded to mark this disgusting event.
It sounds pretty exciting stuff, and I'm delighted to hear that there's some counter maneuvers going on there. That's what I love to see. I love to see the people standing up and fighting back. But I do like your term puppeticians. I haven't heard that one before. I might be using that, but don't worry, I'll be giving you the credit, Ivor. That's a good one.
I stole it from who I do not know, but I know I saw it somewhere, and I said that is perfect.
It's pretty good, actually. The puppeticians. I love that. Next tweet I'm putting out, I'm putting puppeticians into it, but I will give you the credit. All right, so Dr. Tedros, who's not actually a medical doctor, but it's the same doctor, Dr. Tedros, so not a medical doctor. He is a former member of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, which was a highly violent terrorist organization in Ethiopia, and is still on the proscribed list of terrorist organizations, according to the United States of America. He's been accused of corruption with the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and deviant sexual behavior. My goodness, what a wonderful guy to be running the head of our World Health Organization, isn't he?
Yeah, it's kind of almost, reality is stranger than fiction. As you described, it's just absurd. It's almost like they're laughing at us. Like someone should have said, look, this guy is not the right guy. Let's get another puppet in. This guy's too smelly. And someone else in the room back in the day, a few years ago, said, no, the ants are pretty stupid and the media won't cover anything anyway. So there'll be no problem. And I guess that's probably what happened in the back rooms. But yeah, I don't think he's of any major intelligence, to be quite honest. I perceive as I watch him that he isn't even that smart. So he is taking the orders as well. And people need to know that this is all documented from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund in the 50s through to the UN being raised as a useful instrument for world government. The IPCC was then pushed for the climate change because that was seen as a tool to get global government, a kind of problem reaction solution. And the WHO was seen as an enormous tool as part of the UN to push pandemic nonsense, which we've seen. So all these organizations and Club of Rome, Council of Foreign Relations, Bilderberg is all the same kind of people. People have heard about that. There's so many of them. But what unites them all is a desire for a kind of an elite or ultra wealthy to properly manage the world in a kind of an ant farm like China's. And there's no conspiracy theory. We're just seeing those efforts playing out. And the ownership of media, I think, is our biggest problem. But they knew that decades ago, that they must have control of the media to pull off something so obviously crazy to the average person. You must own the media, just like Goebbels said. Give control the media, and I'll turn any nation into a nation of pigs.
That's exactly what he did say. And you know something, Tedros, well, it could be argued that he's quite cunning. He's crafty in some ways because Tedros is not vaccinated. He didn't take the COVID vaccines, right? So there's the guy telling everybody, get your vaccinations, but he's not vaccinated. What does that tell you?
Yeah, I remember that came out. He made some comment to that effect, or he was saving it for the needy, which is just a joke. But I presume he had to pretend, and maybe he never did pretend later that he did take it. I did he leave it hanging after that comment, or did he then say, "Oh, I have it now"? I don't know.
Probably he would have had his wrist slapped by Bill Gates, who's actually the real intelligence. He's what they say. Where you've got specialist policing units or investigations, they talk about the controlling mind. If they're going after mafia organizations, they often talk about the controlling mind. Bill Gates is the controlling mind of the World Health Organization, and he funds it to the tune of 86% funding. So it is not a free form independent organization at all. It is a fraudulent front for his vaccine push out. There's dodgy vaccines that he likes to push out, and he is absolutely focused on profit. He is not focused on people's health. So that's interesting. That is super interesting. Now, you're an Irish citizen. I mean, are you from the north or the south originally? I mean, where were you from?
Oh, I'm from the south. I was born in London, but only there a year. It was incidental. My father was a radio officer and he happened to be in the UK at the time. But yeah, I'm from Dublin, Southern Ireland. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I had a great time over there. I was shown some amazing things. Great people, and I was actually we went to O'Connell Street, down from the Garden of Remembrance, where in 1916 the Rebel Alliance formed and rose, and I was actually on the streets of there, and I must admit I do have an Irish connection. I don't know if I told you that last time or not, but it is to Dublin, believe it or not. So go way back, but it's nevertheless an ancient connection. As you know, the Scots and the Irish have always had that deep cultural bond. I often joke with friends over there, like, who came first, the Scots or the Irish? It's a little bit of friendly banter. But the thing is, standing there on the steps of the old post office building that's there, where the HQ of people like Michael Collins and Daniel Breen, and these guys that were working there. I mean, it was quite a moment, and I was actually asked to speak to over 10,000 Irish Patriots, and I did, and I'll never forget it. What a wonderful reception I got. But Ireland is going through some real tough problems, and I've been talking to a lot of Irish politicians, and I've been stunned to hear that there are illegal migrants who are now standing for election in the local elections. They're not just being allowed to vote; they're standing for election. Ivor, what's going on there?
Yeah, it surprised me also that they're coming out and telling them. And just as a background, under cover of the Ukraine thing, our minister for, I think, children, which is ironic, and some other stuff, he sent out a bunch of tweets saying Ireland is open. And basically, you get yourself a house, we give you money, we give you everything. Ireland is open. And they said it was because of Ukraine. So presumingly elderly and women and children to escape the war zone. No. It's been dominated by young men across the board. But he also sent out the tweet in multiple languages, including African languages, Georgian. So under cover of saying Ukraine and save the women and children, they sent it out to Africa, Georgia, and basically, we want young men. So they flooded the country. If you see the immigration generally, illegal or legal, the graph goes bumbling along at a couple of thousand, whatever, per month or quarter, I can't remember. And then during that period I just mentioned, off the scale. So we took 2 or 3 times the nearest European country per capita, and 100K. And there's tent cities now in Dublin.
Yeah.
There was a massive standoff in Newtown Kennedy, a poor little village in Wicklow. The people and all the people who were protesting were local, saying, you're going to inundate us with young male migrants? What's going on? And they were brutally treated. And interestingly, I think it was 2015, but it was renewed or tweaked in 2024. Legislation was quietly put through that the Irish police could bring in any members of Police Service of Northern Ireland as they saw fit. And that's very interesting because there's a strong suspicion of accents down in Newtown Kennedy that if you want to rough up the locals and the Irish civilians, you want to bring in people who don't like them, because local police or even Irish police are going to be uncomfortable with that kind of thing. Yep. Now, that's a rumor, but I heard the bellowing of one of them roaring at the people, women and young people and old people. And definitely it wasn't Irish. It was a bellow from the UK side of the house.
Well, and what you mean is Northern Ireland. So, listen, I've been hearing this as well, but it gets worse, Ivor, because there seems to be a push now. What I'm going to tell you, you probably already know this, but I've only just found out recently that in Canada they are recruiting non-Canadian citizens, and they're ripping up the rule books as far as you being able to speak English or write English is concerned, just to get them in. They're pushing out the military and the police officers that are loyal to the people of Canada, and they're filling it with people who have no loyalty or cultural identity with Canada. I just found out 2 days ago from my YouTube channel, there's a comment left there by a very, very nice lady saying they're doing this in Germany. So this is happening in Germany. Now it's happening in Ireland. They are now recruiting illegal migrants and giving them the powers of the police to lord it over and subjugate Irish nationals. Now, what people may not realize, because there are sensitivities, I know a lot about the Irish history. Don't maybe know it all because I'm not an Irish national, but if you take police officers that used to be known as the RUC, the Royal Ulster Constabulary in Northern Ireland, who took their oath, and the police officers there, because it's part of so-called UK territory, they still take their oath to the monarch, to the king, which in this case now is King Charles. You send police officers from Northern Ireland, which is UK territory, to Southern Ireland with police officers who have taken their oath of allegiance to the British monarch. That's really not going to go down too well, is it?
No, and that's why I think, as I say, it's a rumor, it's not proven, but the laws are all there to do it. They didn't make those laws for nothing.
Right.
But there's absolute omerta. So we've lost the Irish media completely. It's beyond disgraceful, worse than the UK even. And no one will discuss these things in the media. And I think I mentioned that Eddie had said personal experience for media organizations that we're not allowed to talk about the World Health Treaty. And they're not allowed clearly to talk about anything about what's actually happening. What they are allowed to do and are told to do and are stuffed with extreme left Marxist nutters, as far as I can see, is to go on and on about anyone raising fair questions around mass migration or any of these problems, brand them a racist, brand them far right. It's a cliche now. So recently, a significant Irish journalist used the word terrorists with respect to people standing up and questioning stuff. So they've actually run out of rope with the far right and racist, because at this stage it's lost currency. It's like devalued because of overuse, the idiots. And now they've moved to terrorists. I mean, what's going to be next? They're going to say satanic Irish people are defending their villages. How dare they?
Only if they're called Bambi Thug. And for anybody that doesn't know who Bambi Thug, what's going on? I mean, for the people that we have a lot of people internationally on this channel now. I need to explain who Bambi Thug is, because Bambi Thug is the name of the Irish entry to a bit of a contest that takes place across Europe called the Eurovision Song Contest. But this wasn't a sweet, demure Irish girl singing a beautiful melody. Tell us, what was it?
It was just a screaming demonic rant. So I know some people were offended because she had a guy there done up like Satan and she kept screaming. I mean, I'm not a music aficionado, but come on. I mean, literally a screaming weirdo on the stage. But most of the Irish thought, oh, great, because the media literally stuffed them with expectation that this was great. It's kind of like an end of an era or the fourth turning, that we're beginning to see all this nonsense all over the place. And often that's associated with end of empire. So we are going through some kind of a change. But the Eurovision, people need to realize in retrospect, the European project was crucial for globalist control in the long term. Now, Europe is mostly controlled by the State Department in the USA because they are the world's global cop and they're the big guys. But Europe within itself is modeled on the Soviet Russia system. So you had Politburo and you had the Soviet parliament. There was a parliament, but it was a talk shop. Nothing happened. Politburo and the party leaders made the laws. Well, Europe took that model and they have the European Commission, which makes all the laws. It's unelected. And then they have the European Parliament, which is a talk shop. So they ported across. So I think Eurovision was a long-term view to tie Europe together in a super state, a more globalist structure. Let's get cultural and let's say, hey, let's celebrate our culture. But the irony is, Jim, as you say, in the last couple of years, since Cerveza sickness, I mean, it's just getting nuts. All it is LBGQ plus 17 or whatever that nonsense is. That's what it is. And Satanism and just weird stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
I have no religion, but it doesn't mean much to me, but it's offensive nonsense instead
Yeah.
of real
Yeah.
quality culture. So they
Yeah.
want to attack the culture and replace
Yeah.
it with, let's be honest, nonsense. And it all goes into the same thing: transhumanism, break the existing society, flood it with immigrants. If they don't speak English and they don't assimilate into the country, that's a bonus. If they form ghettos, that's a bonus for them because it divides the country. Have the
Yeah.
Eurovision full of like weird crap. That's going to disorient people and take them
Yeah.
away from real culture. So all
Yeah.
of these different threads, they seem disparate, but they're actually quite smart. That's probably what me and my corporate buddies we would do if we were nasty enough to have their agenda. We'd be whiteboarding and brainstorming how we subvert society, culture, and history across Europe in all the countries, and how do we do a multi-stranded effort that would be synergistic to really break these nationalities and sovereignties down and make them into kind of Play-Doh or putty to create your new system. It's 101. It's totalitarianism 101.
It is, and you're right. They really do have these workshops. How are we going to destroy the Irish society? How are we going to
Yeah.
destroy Scottish identity? How are we going to dilute Welsh traditionalism and English heritage? How do we destroy that? Well, we'll get them to hate their flags. We'll brainwash the young people into burying the Union Jack and to burying the Irish tricolour and the St Andrew's Cross and the Welsh flag. We're going to do all of these things. There is a plan. Ultimately, it's they are the enemies of humanity
Yeah,
itself, in my opinion, Ivor. They
absolutely. I
hate
mean,
humanity.
it's out with the quality cultural heritage of the old. It's in with the nonsense new. And you know a funny thing, Jim? I made this point in recent talks. I began to realize that Stalin got the people to follow him back in that difficult era, and he used the motherland because he knew cleverly that the Russians had a huge love of the motherland. So he kept talking about the motherland and standing together, and it worked, but it was based on something real. And then Hitler, of course, he used the fatherland, and he knew about the racism that was bubbling under the surface in Germany. So he talked to that, and the people went with him. But he
Yeah.
was talking about something real cultural phenomena. But you know what this new bunch in the last 30 years are using to subvert the people? It's quite interesting, and it's a poor reflection on modern people. What they're actually using is nonsense. So
Mm.
they're not using anything real to fool the people. They're using virtue signaling, trans sex stuff, bloody flus and colds. I mean, go through the full list. The whole lot is utter nonsense. But they've
Yeah.
chosen nonsense to fool the people, which is a sad reflection on the people, I'll have to say.
Well, it is, but not all the people are fooled by
No,
it.
no.
And there is a rising tide of people that are awakening, thanks to people like you and your magnificent channel and the great work, in actual fact, Ivor, that you do. And when I came back on the scene after a long absence after my political shenanigans and then the pandemic hit and everything else, I went back to the farm, putting up fence, and then I hopped back on social media. And I followed you for a long time. And I remember when I had a tiny little channel and I thought, wow, Ivor's great. And I'm all liking it and sharing it. And then you followed me back and here we are. But, everybody, including you, are playing a vital role in waking people up and calling out the nonsense for what it is. But there is something very quite serious I do want to get your opinion on. And a good friend of the channel, his name is John O'Looney. He is a professional businessman. He's a funeral director. He has a great business.
Oh,
And
yeah.
John O'Looney is quite outspoken. Now, I had him on with me not that long ago. It was about 3 or 4 days ago. His post went fairly big, I've got to say. It went viral, and it's still going. Simply, probably, possibly because of the message or what we discussed actually resonated with a lot of people, because a lot of people have been thinking this, but he kind of really articulated it in a very, very good way. And what he was saying, and this applies to Ireland, which is why I would like your opinion on it. John has basically said that these illegal migrants, these so-called illegal migrants, are in actual fact being trained by the Black Watch. The Black Watch is a Scottish regiment based in Perth. Now, the Scottish regiments all kind of amalgamated into, into one, but they are still there. But he was saying that they were getting trained by this regiment and others housed in military barracks, that they were going to places in Turkey for additional training, crowd control, and that he is concerned that because some of his military colleagues have got evidence, aerial footage, drone footage, detailed evidence, registration numbers of vehicles that are basically taking all these dinghies, sending them back to France to be used, send them back to France to be used again, and it's like a conveyor belt that's coming in. Outward motors are being put onto pallets separately. They're then being sent in, and the whole thing is like a revolving door. It's like a conveyor belt for illegal migrants. And he's saying that the reason they're doing this is to sort of keep it under the radar, so to speak. But this is stored in Home Office compounds. So the government obviously know what they're doing and they know what's going on. But what he did say kind of shocked a lot of people, millions of people actually, that have seen this. When he said that he believes that there is a plan, going by what he's talked to other people about in the military, that there is a plan by the World Health Organization, back to Tedros and Bill Gates again, I'm afraid, that they are trying to take control of individual countries' sovereignty so that they can then declare a pandemic whenever they want. Whenever Bill wants to make a few more quid on his vaccines, he's going to get his mate Tedros, his stooge, to declare it. We're going to come on to H5N1 in a minute and what's happening in Texas, because that could be something that could be very serious. We did talk about that. But this is what is being planned. And in Britain, they're talking about the fact that they may well send the British military out of the country to the meat grinder that is Ukraine, confiscate their mobile phones and lines of communication so they can't hear what's back in the UK. And these migrants are going to be issued with uniforms. They're going to be given special powers. They're going to be working under the United Nations as a standing army in the UK, carrying out the instructions of globalists within the World Health Organization. We might be talking forced vaccinations, Ivor. We might be talking door-to-door stuff. We might be talking lockdowns and enforced lockdowns, illegal migrants telling the Brits and probably the Irish, you can't come out your home, go back to you, or where's your papers, Ivor? Show me your papers, says some guy from Somalia. I want to know who you are. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I heard this in the UK from a few sources. The problem is I have not seen any documentation yet. So my base case is that they are doing essentially the Clergy plan: flood the zone, all the countries with migrants, and set up ghettos and just weaken the structures. Now, by all means, it would be a great idea for them to pull from those pool of migrants and get them into security forces and police for the reasons you outlined. You could do that opportunistically later, and that would work very well for their disgusting ends. But whether they're being trained realistically in camps in large numbers militarily, I'm not sure. I haven't seen the proof, though you've referred to it. As you say, apparently there's proof. I haven't seen that yet. It would not shock me anymore. Before 2020, of course, it would shock me and I would laugh at you. Obviously, since the absurdity of the COVID and the monkeypox and all the other nonsense, it wouldn't surprise me anymore. So it could be the case, but I think even if they went with the lighter option without training them, it would still be very effective. Just start bringing them into security forces with excellent packages, at the right time. That alone would be extremely dangerous for people who have no affinity with the local population. You'd create stormtroopers.
That goes back to your earlier point about the Northern Irish police coming down to police communities like Newton Mount Kennedy, where there's no affinity to them. They don't maybe even really like them. In fact, it might not be just that they're neutral. They might actually just not like them.
They might not like them at all.
They might not like them at all. Could be based on religion, could be based on other things, man's inhumanity to man. But it's the same idea. Migrants coming into the UK, in England, in Wales, in Scotland, in your country, in Ireland, have no affinity to the local people. They have no affinity to the religion or the culture or the identity. If Klaus Schwab says, get heavy with them. What are they going to do? They're going to get heavy with them, and they're going to probably enjoy it. This is worrying.
Yeah, it's nasty. I met an investor guy in Dubai whose father and mother came to the UK. And people need to realize the immigration in the 50s and 60s from Pakistan, India, these people came over. They wanted to learn English. They wanted to open shops. They wanted to work really hard, and they wanted to get their kids into college. And they wanted to essentially be British, largely. I know there's problems now, disaffected youth. Okay. But back then, and he said his mother told them, the first thing you're going to do, and do it quickly, is you're going to learn English. They came over very young. And she says, because we are now British. And he said, they are shocked. His parents, they're elderly now. They are shocked at what's going on, where they're flooding their England with foreign young men who clearly have no interest in the culture or becoming part of the UK. So people need to realize this immigration, the puppeticians like to compare it to, oh, but remember the Irish went to England in the building in the 50s, the diaspora. They're fraudulent. They're lying. It is nothing compared to the Vietnamese boat people who came to Ireland when I was young. They assimilated. They came to our schools. They were delighted to be here. We brought them in reasonable numbers. This is utterly different. And whether they're trained abroad to an extent or not doesn't matter. They are flooding the zone. And the Irish people know it, because one beautiful high point was the Irish Times Red Sea poll. And the Irish Times was the paper of record in Ireland. And now it is literally a propaganda rag. It is comical to read their articles. It's astonishing. But they did their official poll, and 76%, I think, of Irish people, not far right, not racist. This was proper, all ages. 76%, the government has to massively deal with this immigration thing. They gotta close this off. It's crazy. So they know that. And the referendum to take woman and family out of the constitution and bring in some form of trans-sex weird stuff, I'm paraphrasing, 2-1 defeat or more, you know? So positive note is the people are now realizing something crazy is going on. It's coming from our puppeticians, but most people are beginning to realize they are clearly reporting to a higher level.
Oh, definitely. There's a central command. Now, you can call it the Bilderbergers, the Council of 300, the Trilateral Commission, the World Economic Forum. I mean, the list is extensive, as you alluded to at the start. But whoever's controlling all of that does not have Ireland's interests at heart, or Britain's interests at heart, or America's interests at heart. They are after a one world global order that they control, and it's not good news. Now, there is one other thing before we move on to the next section, because H5N1 bird flu avian influenza has been found in Texas, jumping the species barrier from chickens, poultry into cattle. And now there's purportedly several hundred workers that are being tested for it. And I don't like the sound of, there was a guy, I'm just trying to remember his name, and I had it in my mind, it's just gone. But he's a World Economic Forum member, so that should tell you everything you need to know. Working for the WHO, he's a doctor. And I put out a post, and he's there talking about, this is very concerning. This could lead to another pandemic. This time it could be really bad with a high mortality. We're talking 1 in 4 death rate. And I'm going, fear, fear, fear. Psyops, psyops, psyops. This is another Bill Gates globalist piece of nonsense. But the problem is, I think they're mad enough to actually do something pretty nasty just to get the reaction, because Gates and his wife, Melinda, before she left him and before she found out about his involvement with the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, they turned around to each other and they looked at it in a strange way, and they had this strange smile on this video, and he said, next time they'll take it seriously. Really?
That was a hilarious clip, and it was great propaganda for our side, to be quite honest, because we need to use good propaganda to simply try and counter their insane stuff. Was that post-COVID that when he did that? Or it was pre-COVID?
No. It was post-COVID, because he was saying, he says, next time they'll take it seriously. Like, well, next time we're going to have a really bad one, and then you're going to believe us. And we'll get a needle into all your arms. But I'm just saying that because that does link into what John O'Looney and I discussed on this channel just a few days ago where they might be close to declaring the pandemic, and that could very well be another reason why all these illegal migrants are pouring into not just Ireland and the UK, but all over the world. Australia, New Zealand, America,
Oh,
Canada,
everyone's at it.
all getting hit. They're all at
Yeah,
it.
because it's a universal globalist one world government strategy. So of course, all the countries to varying degrees are told to deploy it. And like the hate speech laws in Ireland make no sense. They had to back off from them. But the Helen McEntee, the Justice Minister, is still trying to force it in. It makes no sense, but they are told, they have promised above that they're going to get it. But back to the thing about, I'm not sure about that one. I'm not sure they'll really be able to successfully, and I think they should be concerned themselves strategically. When they pulled off the supposed once in 100-year pandemic, everyone got a surprise. They caught everyone off guard, saving granny, blah, blah, blah. And let's be honest, the majority fell for the nonsense. Okay.
Yeah.
But people are goldfish, and in 10 or 15 years' time, you'd probably be able to get the goldfish to fall again. But in the next year or two, it's a bit recent, and I think there's too many people now that say, hold on a minute, this is smelly. So I'd be surprised if they want to actually deploy that kind of nonsense. I suspected they'd deploy a major financial crash to have a new scary thing rather than another virus. But I'm not sure. H5N1, I mean, this is a PCR based fraud again. And clearly they are using PCR to find fragments of irrelevancy. It's all asymptomatic. It's completely irrelevant. It's farcical. Why are they still pushing this one? You think maybe they've got a real nasty strain?
I mean, H5N1 has a mortality rate within poultry of 70%, 75%. Yeah, it's lethal. I mean, it's lethal. Usually what happens is, and I'm not a virologist, but usually if it starts to jump the species barrier, it swaps that lethality for the ability to spread, which makes it less lethal. But even at that, it's nasty. But I mean, one of the things...
one quick thing, Jim, just on that. It's interesting that I don't think they want to risk themselves. So I think generally they also know that their own vaccines are utterly useless. They know that, right? Okay, we hear how amazing they are. We know from the data they are junk. So they know they don't have an antidote to these things, right? They say they do to sell them, but they know they're rubbish. So I don't think they'd really want to let something uncontrollable out that really was severe, because they'd be worried about themselves because they don't have an antidote.
They might have a real vaccine that isn't mRNA rubbish, gene editing stuff. They could actually do something for themselves.
Maybe, but I think their technology is that useless that they maybe don't even have that. But it's possible. I agree, Jim. It's possible.
But one thing seems to be right. I mean, they seem to be absolutely desperate to control everybody. They seem to be obsessed with it, don't they? They've got all the money in the world. They've got all the power and the influence and the fame. It's not enough for them. For whatever reason, this UN Agenda 2030, this World Economic Forum Agenda 2030 keeps raising its ugly head. I almost wonder if they're frightened of that particular year. Is there something happening in and around 2030 that's got them worried? I don't know. But anyway, I know that you're going to Orlando shortly. And of course, I want to get your opinion on what's going on with Trump and whether you think they're maybe going to try and pull a fast one over there, stop him getting elected. But what are you doing in Orlando? Come on, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I was approached broadly by the kind of financial industry, hedge fund people, investors, groups like that. And it was interesting, but I got an amazing intro. It was very humbling. In Dubai, I was brought over and they ended up giving me the keynotes on each day of a 2-day conference. And in one of them, I went through the Rockefeller story and explained the world. The Grand Chess Game was the title. And it set off the first day's conference. And on the second day, I went through freedom movements and all that. But the intro was great. They basically perceived me as a hero of the COVID thing because they all knew it was rotten, but they didn't have the data. They just knew it was rotten. So this community, one guy there, George Gammon, and people should look up on YouTube, George Gammon or Rebel Capitalist, and subscribe to his 2 channels. Because he explains macroeconomics, investments, where the world's going financially. And the stuff in CNN and CNBC is junk. If you do what they say, you're going to get the opposite outcome of what they say. It's incredible. But Rebel Capitalist Live is on the end of the month in Orlando, and they've brought me over. They're flying me in to give a talk there and give a broader perspective. And they're just a fantastic group, and the people they have there are amazing. Like, so the financial world is interesting. The awareness is much, much higher than any other group, like doctors or professors or plumbers. The financial hedge fund investment people, they're just very aware of how the world works. And almost none of them really fell for the COVID nonsense.
Interesting stuff. All right. Well, as always, our time is running away with us. But as I always like to, and I'm going to give you the same courtesy as I always do, I'd like you to have the last word here. So for the next 2 or 3 minutes, Ivor, the floor is yours.
Oh, right. I'll have to think about that for a nanosecond. Yeah, so I think the message is positivity. So we know about the Rockefeller Brothers Fund in the 50s, and they brought in Kissinger, and Klaus Schwab set up the World Economic Forum and all the other groups we mentioned. So they are significant forces, and they're like a swarm, as Dr. Shiva I interviewed said. It's not so much there's a real kingpin at the top. It's a swarm of interested parties, corporates, and all these groups, and they're all intermingling incestuously. Members are members of other groups, so they're a very powerful array, and they've done an incredible job with COVID. In fairness, they turned the world upside down based on a cold, so you got to hand it to the enemy. And they've got a lot of push in for universal digital ID, but they didn't succeed in universal vaccination or digital ID. And now what's happening is awareness is growing in the people. So no politicians are going to help us. Only the people, the grassroots, being aware will pressure the puppeticians. Some puppeticians will actually decide to change sides. You know, this has happened all of human history. And if they do, it'll be in their interest to criticize the other puppeticians who are still reporting to the mothership. And then you could get a tipping point. So I just think it's all to play for. We're on the razor's edge, like you mentioned about awareness. If awareness keeps growing, they know this. That's why they're trying to rush in hate speech laws, pandemic treaties. They're trying to legalize the system and lock it down, because they're watching in one corner of their eye and saying, my God, the awareness is rising in a dangerous way. So it's all to play for, and it's all about awareness of the people, because anyone who broadly understands the Rockefeller story and the EU, UN, even as a broad geopolitical history understanding, will never believe any of the nonsense that comes out in the media. They will be inoculated for life. So that's what we need.
Well, as always, I'm always amazed at your intellect, rapier-like handle on things. You've got a great grasp of it, and you articulate it particularly well. I would just like to say a huge thank you, Ivor, for taking time out of a very busy schedule, because I know you're all over the place. Thank you so much indeed for being with me here.
Thanks so much, Jim. You're doing an amazing job as well, and I love your reach. I've been retweeting and noticing you're getting big views, big reach, and to the point of awareness. That's what it's all about. Thank you.
Well, we're all in this together, and I wish you well on your travels, Ivor. Need to get you back on again and maybe talk a little bit more about the financial aspects of it, because I know that that's a lot of interest to people, of course, as well. And if they see what's going on, so we want to learn from them too. But thank you once again. And once again, to all the people who are out there watching this, thank you once again. My sincere thanks to you for liking, for sharing, and for helping to support our great and wonderful guests who have got deep knowledge and experience on all of these wonderful things. And it really helps them to get the message out as well. So thank you, one and all. And thank you once again, Ivor. We won't leave it so long next time. Maybe we'll get you back in a bit quicker. But thanks once again. This is Jim Ferguson. Thanks. And we'll speak soon. Take care, Ivor. All the best, mate. Bye-bye.